Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending this lecture at the Institute of World Politics. For those of you who are new, IWP is a graduate school of national security and international affairs. We have 5 master's degree programs, 18 certificates of study, and our new doctoral program. If you are interested in learning more about us, please feel free to speak to one of our staff at the conclusion of the event. Today's lecture will be given by Admiral Paul Becker. He is known for his success leading large, diverse, high-performing organizations in peace, crisis, and combat. He is a dynamic public speaker and author whose articles and interviews have been widely published. Upon his retirement in 2016, the Naval Intelligence Community established the Rear Admiral Paul Becker Teamwork, Tenacity Leadership Award in his honor. Please join me in welcoming Admiral Becker.
Thank you, shipmate. That's the highest compliment we give in the Navy. Call someone a shipmate. Most of that was true. Good to see you. There are smiles, and I can feel a little enthusiasm and camaraderie. That's how I know I'm not in the Pentagon. And for those of you who haven't been there, over in Arlington, it's a building with 5 sides. On every issue, you may think, from the Institute of World Politics. But today, just one issue, but with many facets to it, and that's leadership. Because I've thought about this, and we just don't need good leaders in the military, we need good leaders in society. And we need good leaders that understand policy, and we need good leaders that understand politics. Right? I had my option a year plus ago when I was part of the President's transition team. I was the Intel Community Landing Team leader, the IC lead, and at the end of such an effort, you're invariably given the opportunity to return to government service and become the Deputy Assistant Junior Under Secretary of something or other. But it's not what I wanted to do after working for 33 years in uniform. I have a passion for sharing what I've learned about leadership in the military out in the real world. And coming on 2 years of that now, and it's eye-opening and it's a lot of fun, and I'd rather keep doing that. I've had some medical hurdles along the way, I won't bore you with them all, but it also gives me the chance to share these lessons on leadership to improve the patient experience and the quality of care with healthcare professionals as well. So that's getting to Simon Sinek's why. Do I talk about leadership? And without further ado, I'll get to that. But before I do, right, I asked Chris before I began speaking, hey, how many people do you think this room would sit? And he said he wasn't sure, but last month it slept about 20. So make sure if you pick the 4 or 5 o'clock afternoon spot that you are the dynamic speaker that your bio says you are. So I will do my best in that regard. Right? And in typical military fashion, with an hour allocated for us here, I'll speak for about 59 minutes and then open the floor to questions and whatever you'd like to cover. We should have plenty of time, right, to get to those. Okay, when I was growing up in the 1960s in New York City, I had a great set of parents. They'd plop me down in front of the television set for hours and hours at a time and tell me to behave. So, without having met people in the military or lived near a military base, these were my ideas of who were leaders and military heroes, right? You know most of their names. If there's any of them you don't know, raise your hand and I'd be happy to point it out to you. But you could see I have a bit of an irreverent streak in me by the folks that I thought were good leaders. But on the whole, the characteristics that these folks had going for them, and this was my early impression of what a leader was or should be, was they were taller, they were better looking, they were smarter, they were braver, and they were more heroic than your average person. I was 0 for 5 in those categories, right, when I did a little bit of self-assessment. And I did want to join the Navy, though, right? The guy in the lower left is Ernest Borgnine, the actor who played Lieutenant Quentin McHale in McHale's Navy. And not only was he a leader in war, but he seemed to be having a plenty good time in the South Pacific. So that interested me more than living in a foxhole or being shot at and having to deal with rain and snow. And the Navy ended up being my chosen path. So off I went. And I soon found out at the Naval Academy, and then not long after that, once I joined the fleet, that, wow, leaders come in all shapes or sizes, right? They didn't have to be the tall white man, right? I found plenty of leaders of different genders, of different ethnic origins, of different colors, and of different types. And that really struck me and made a great impression on me that there'd be a chance for me, because I was 0 for 5, remember, in those key categories. So by the time I got to the fleet, I got to see some great leaders, I got to see some terrible leaders, but I knew one size didn't fit all. So it gets to one of my bottom lines that I think leaders are not born, they can be bred. And that's why I'm passionate about sharing some lessons. And you never get it all in one-stop shopping, right? There's no one lesson that you come out of a lecture, now I know how to be a good leader. It's a patient accumulation of advantages. Wait a minute, that's how the Chinese describe what they're up to in the South China Sea. I take back that phrase, but the concept applies, right? It's an accumulation of bits and pieces and bite-sized chunks. And I hope this is added to your library of such studies. Okay. A little bit about, not each one of these stories, but this is a prelude to leadership, right? Either in Navy uniform, you can see khakis in the middle, with the famous comic on the left, Jay Leno, and then other people who I had memorable experiences. And some of them were senior to me, and some of them were junior to me. So a key lesson that I took away about leadership once I was in the fleet, and once even as a fleet sailor, I spent an awful lot of time ashore in landlocked countries. That was the nature of combat over the last couple of decades. And the key point I took away, right, from here, for example, in the upper right, that's a Marine sergeant. And I learned more about intelligence, human intelligence, counterintelligence, how to run counterintelligence organizations from him, who in real life is a New York City cop, right? Only he was activated to be a Marine sergeant in the reserves. So I learned more about that field of the profession as a one-star at that point in the military for over 25 years from him. And a key lesson for me there is it's okay to be reverse mentored, right? You know, a lot of people are reluctant to take advice and really sit down and learn with someone younger or junior to them, right, in an organization. But that's a type of inclusiveness that I found very valuable, and I'd ask you to be open to that experience as well. I won't bore you with the sea stories. Until the questions and answers, we can come back to any of them. Now, here are some more of the classic leaders that you may study about here at the Institute for World Politics. And I'll get to the teamwork, tone, tenacity part in just a bit. But this is a little bit of a scene setter. And I learned teamwork and tone and tenacity from every one of the folks that we just covered, including Jay Leno, right? And we'll come back to it. But from the top left, there's General Stan McChrystal, right? Former director of the Joint Special Operations Command and International Security Assistance Forces in Afghan. Admiral Stavridis, who was NATO's Supreme Commander and the European Commander, now the Dean at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. General Dempsey was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I was his J2, Director of Intelligence, for a couple of years. Lower left, still the Director of NSA and Commander Cybercom, Admiral Rogers, who I've worked with several times. General Petraeus, front and center. Lower, who I've worked with several times, both in the Central Command headquarters and forward in Southwest Asia. And then there's people who you may not know their names, but I'll tell you about them and come back to them later. That's the world's strongest Master Chief, Todd Schroeder. He's now retired, but he's the powerlifting coach at the U.S. Naval Academy. And there's Colonel Annette Teresi, who's a retired Army MI officer. And Annette now works for General Dynamics, but the most tenacious professional officer I ever worked with. Back to the point that you don't have to be a general and wearing a lot of stars, right, to be a leader. And some people I learned a great deal from. Okay, why teamwork, tone, tenacity? I'll get to each of the attributes in a bit. But there are longer, better lists, I think, of what comprises leadership characteristics and treatises on leadership. Only I can't remember them, right? There are cognitive studies done on this, and people generally remember things in threes. Even better if there's some alliteration or a little bit of a hook and a catch to it. So hard consonant, T, useful, but they need to be the right words, and I'll discuss the components of what I think are teamwork, tone, tenacity in a bit. But listen, look, I read a lot, and I bet you do too. If you're in this room, you're a reader, okay? And I've read and studied leadership for a long time, and I'm always trying to improve on it. And there are great lists that I have earmarked in my office at home and I use all the time. There's Marcus Aurelius's collection of writings called Meditations, right? Former Roman emperor. He knew a lot more about leadership, I think, than me. But shortest he can come up with was 10, which is too much for me to remember. Then there was General Colin Powell, right? A former, well, he's done a lot of big things for our country and still doing it. He has really a benchmark study that the military, not study, but just a thought piece that he presented when he was chairman, 13 rules for leadership. They're great. I have them earmarked. I reference them all the time. I can't remember them, right, unless I'm looking at a list of 13 things. Stephen Covey, he's got 7 habits. Had to write a book about the 8th habit because couldn't fit them all into one book. And then there's one I like from a professor, John Maxwell, a real social scientist of some renown. I really like what he has to say, and he has best-selling book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And if I can't remember 10, 21 is hopeless for quick recall, but I have them handy. So I like the idea of teamwork, tone, tenacity, because it's short, it's memorable, it's actionable. And ultimately, when you're faced with leadership situations, you may or may not have the luxury of time and deliberate planning on how to approach it. But when the poo hits the fan, and whether it's a family crisis, whether it's a professional crisis, whether it's a financial crisis, okay, what's a framework that I need to fall back on? And today's soundbite intensive, right? Information intensive, Facebook friending, LinkedIn looking, Twitter tuned, high impact communication world. It's good, in my opinion, to have a framework that you can fall back on immediately and say, okay, what are some of the key structural themes I need to use in this leadership event, right? Long term or short term. And teamwork, tone, tenacity fit that bill. And it's a triangle, right? Picture an equilateral triangle with 3 T's. This is my next graphic. I just haven't mastered, the PowerPoints just yet. But ideally, teamwork, tone, tenacity are mutually reinforcing. Right? You want an equilateral triangle, but it depends on the situation which one's more important, right? Is teamwork more important than tone? The Ivy League answer is it depends, right? And same thing with tenacity. But one thing's for sure, if you're missing one of the 3 elements, then you don't have a triangle anymore. Then you just have a couple of sticks that fall down on themselves, and they're not a comprehensive geometric diagram, and that's the sweet spot of what leadership will be. So I'll talk about each of these folks and my experiences working directly for them. I didn't pull them out because they're probably some of the most renowned senior military leaders of this generation, but I found myself post 9/11 in a Forrest Gump-like situation as an intel officer where I worked directly for 5 of those, right? And then I worked directly with the Master Chief and the Colonel on the lower right. So really incredible string of circumstances, most of it in the deserts or the mountains instead of being afloat like sailors should be. But that's where I was through a good chunk of the last decade plus. Okay, teamwork. Start drilling down on some of these characteristics. These lessons that I learned in the military, but clearly they apply anywhere and everywhere. Okay, one of the most overlooked aspects, I think, of being a leader is that a leader has to build relationships. And the goal of building relationships isn't to have a quantity of relationships, right? It's not LinkedIn or Facebook, oh, I'm up to 3,300 contacts now. That's not relationships, those are just contacts, okay? The byproduct of relationships is that you start building up trust with someone, right? It's the quality of the relationships that bring you somewhere. And when you have some quality in your relationships, well, then you start building up trust between one another. And then the byproduct of trust, right, follow me here. So relationships help develop trust, and the byproduct of trust is developing loyalty. And bar none, the best teams that I was ever part of, or that I wasn't part of, but I envied and admired from across the airbase or across the naval station or across the Army compound, the teams that were loyal to each other were the better teams. So there's a follow there. Relationships, trust, and then loyalty. And loyalty gives you something to fall back on when you disagree on the specifics of an issue, right? Teamwork doesn't mean perfect harmony, right? There are teams of rivals. It's good to have discourse. Teamwork doesn't mean big sizes. Could be a small team. In fact, you make the good argument, smaller teams are more effective than larger teams. It's tough to scale trust and loyalty from a small unit to a very large unit. But when you have loyalty and trust in one another, suppose you disagree on a professional topic. Well, now you have something to fall back on where you know the individual and you don't let it tumble into a state of public discourse, which sadly I think is a characteristic of current political, right, and civic discussions. It's a shame that we've hit that point. What can you say about those folks? Well, they probably don't trust each other. They're probably not loyal to each other. They may have a relationship, but it may not be a very positive relationship. So back to the quality instead of the quantity, and then the trust and loyalty. And if you don't have trust, well, what's the opposite of trust? Distrust is the easy answer. That's an easy wordplay. But it's jealousy, right? It's discord, it's disunity, right? And it's suboptimized performance. And that's the antithesis of what teamwork is. So even if something is as linear and non-complex as pulling on this line that's going over the side of the ship to shore, right? You've seen this on cartoon shows, right? If the back 5 people on that rope all let go as part of a prank, right? The front 3 people are either going to all fall backwards, and hurt themselves, or the other team's going to yank them into the mosh pit, in front of them. So there's an element of trust that you see even here on something linearly, but as future policymakers and political leaders, younger folks in this room, you're going to have the chance to operate in that third dimension of trust and confidence with others that you may meet for a short term or long term. So you want to build teamwork, and you do that through relationships, trust, and loyalty. Ah, but Becker, you may be thinking, but no one's asked yet. Feel free to raise your hand anytime, or we'll really have time for questions and answers at the end. How do you build trust? Okay, I got you. Build trust. Easier said than done. How do you build trust? Ah, I have the answer. Do what you say you're going to do is the simplest response I can give to you. It's a variation of honesty. It is honesty. But it's a variation on the definition of the word integrity, right? Which often means and referred to as doing the right thing. Person of integrity does the right thing. Person who's honest keeps their word. The best way to build up trust with someone is when you tell them, I'll be there at 8 o'clock. Well, you're there at 8 o'clock, right? You're not a no-show. You're not there at 8:15. Or you're going to deliver something in writing that's going to be ready enough to give to the boss, and the office will be satisfied. Make sure that it's quality controlled and delivered on time, right? The patient accumulation of these small steps is the best way to build trust. If I had my choice, the best way to build trust, right, if we were just put together in a room right here, all of us right now, build a team, build a trust. If I had time and resources, I'd get a few cases of soft and hard drinks and take us on a whitewater rafting trip, right? And we'd go away for about 3 days, and we'd come back, and I bet you there'd be a lot of trust and loyalty amongst us, more so than you can get in a 55-minute lecture, right? So consider, right, the temporal aspect to building trust. Doesn't happen overnight, and consistency and honesty and integrity are all part of the building blocks of that formula. So that's teamwork, okay? Oh, tone. There are a lot of aspects to tone. Sometimes you don't have to say a thing, and you're just inspired by someone's attitude and tone. This is an epic photo of our generation, right? No words need to be said, right? You know what happened, you know what they're thinking, you know how you feel. That sets a good tone. Okay? Other aspects of tone, right? Maintaining your cool under pressure, right? Thomas Jefferson has a pretty famous citation. If you follow me on Twitter, you'd know I used it just yesterday or the day before, I think. Nothing ever helps someone maintain control over a situation than maintaining their calm under all circumstances. So that's an aspect of tone. Back to the poo hitting the fan analogy. That's as hard as I'll curse here, because I don't want to get in trouble with, Chris here. Very soft triggers nowadays to end up in the wrong place in the public spotlight. And I won't bring us there. I respect the integrity of the IWP. But, all right, when the poo does hit the fan, how do you react? My instinct is to go loud, because I'm a New Yorker, right? And start moving my arms and, generate a lot of motion. I found out that's counterproductive in both the military, for the years I was in uniform, and in business as well. There's something to be said for that calm demeanor, right? And it didn't come naturally to me. And I was counseled on it, right, over the years, that this is a way for you to improve. So that's an example of tone. But there are other examples of tone, right? Back to some of those bosses there. It happened to be the Navy bosses, Stavridis and Rogers, admirals, Stavridis and Rogers. When they would come around and ask you, how you doing, right? It wasn't the precursory, hey, how you doing? Okay, and you give the head nod like Joey from Friends, and you keep moving along, right? It's, how are you doing? And until you gave them a pretty decent answer, they weren't leaving. Like, no, how are you doing? You know, wife, okay, kids fine. You moved to Annapolis last year, if I recall. How's that going for you? How are these projects going? When we'd sit at a table, right, a group project, ultimately that the admirals were accountable for, probably going to SecDef or the president, you know, on the levels of interaction they had, they would ask the folks at the table, right? I may have been their director of intelligence, but there were plenty of people, some of them here in this room, you know, that actually contributed to it way more than I did. And these admirals would say, well, what do you think? How should we approach it, right? It was an inclusive feeling whenever we were with Admirals Stavridis and Rogers, right? And that leaves a great impression that they're great leaders. And it left a great impression that they're great leaders because you felt like you belonged. They set the tone. I don't remember what all the topics were that we used to prepare for them. You know, it could have been the Arab Spring, or it could have been a Russian resurgence, or it could have been, you know, just pick another topic. But I do remember how they made me feel, right? Because these were genuine folks, and when they asked, how are you doing? They meant it. So the goal is not for you to walk around to anyone you work with and ask how you're doing. That may not be your style. But I bring that up about a couple of these old shipmates, right? Stavridis and Rogers, because they were genuine in who they were. And I'll use the word sailors, but it could be any member of the armed forces or any civilian that I've ever worked with. And when you make mistakes as a leader, right? When you're a manager or a leader in that case, people will forgive you if you're honest and you say, I really screwed up, or I didn't think this through, and we're going to have to do it over, or, you know, I'm sorry it cost us time and effort. But they won't forgive you if you're a phony, right? And you try and bluff your way through all these things. And no one on this graphic is a phony, right? In my opinion. You could talk all day about each one of them, but they were genuine when they talked to you about what needed to be done and how I felt about working with them as well. I didn't use the specific examples about teamwork along the way, and I'd say General Stan McChrystal was the greatest leader in terms of building a team. In fact, he's written a book about it, right? You've probably read it, Team of Teams, right? He not only built teams, he built teams of teams. And trust and loyalty and relationships, I've never seen anyone finer. And there are a lot of different ways I can demonstrate that to you. But let me use one tactical example. It bleeds into tone as well. You can imagine he was a pretty busy fellow, right? He was the commander of Joint Special Operations Command, you know, for a lot, worldwide, right? Happened to be most of the activity in the day in Southwest Asia. But if something was happening in the Philippines or in the Sahel region of Africa, that was Joint Special Operations Command as well. Anyway, if you sent an email to General McChrystal, whether you were a civilian, a contractor, an officer, enlisted, I could guarantee you would get a response back. And it was, if he was on the 2 line, and he encouraged that type of information flow. So that's teamwork. So you think of how busy he was, right? If he was on the 2 line and you sent it to him and others, right? Hey, General, in response to your question this morning, here's the follow-up, okay? You fill in your 3 to 5 sentences. You'd get a response back, and it was never okay, or thanks, or got it. It was, Paul, really appreciate that. This is highly valuable. You know, we really need to start moving in this direction, and I'm glad you CC'd all these other folks. So at the same time, it distributed intent and action for the rest of the team to do other things, but it made you feel very valuable and that your word as a junior, relatively junior member of the team was being afforded all its just attention. And it was high praise, right? And chances are, it doesn't have to be a general. Let's just say you got to send a message up to Mr. Cosgriff upstairs, right? You know, you're probably going to spend an extra minute or two spell checking it and making sure it looks just right. And if he, number one, worst thing, never says anything back to you, that's kind of demotivating. How much time am I going to put into that email for the team next time? Or you just get back got it, thanks, okay. So I've never bought into the theory that senior leaders are busy and too busy to write back someone who takes the time to go direct to them. And it's up to the leader to determine, do they want direct communications? There's pros and cons of that. I'll let individuals decide. But Stan McChrystal, absolutely the tops on that. Okay, that's some on tone. Tenacity. That little picture says a lot right there. That's not my hand, you know, for the record. The Alexandria rock climbing, you know, place is about as risky as I'll get if I'm really counting on pulling myself up beyond that. Listen, tenacity is not endurance, right? We can all endure and persevere to some degree, right? Tenacity is perseverance with a purpose. Okay? You know how I like 3 alliteration, teamwork, tone, tenacity. I only come up with 2 there. I could probably force a 3rd P in, but tenacity to me is perseverance with a purpose. It's knowing what your end state is going to be in business or in life and working your way backwards. And it's making sure that you're willing to go that extra mile to get there, right? There are always obstacles. Some are lesser than others. But when you encounter an obstacle, who's got the indomitable will to just achieve the end state that you envisioned before you began? Do you go through it? Do you go over it? Do you go under it? Do you go around it? Right? There's no giving up. And the folks that demonstrated the most tenacity that I ever saw, from a strategic perspective, I tell you, it was General Petraeus, right? He was literally almost laughed off of the national stage when he came up with this idea for the surge. Right? You probably study it, you know, here in some of the courses. I know there are 5 different majors, and it's a good overlap case study if not already used. Right? He was politically ridiculed. Even his own military peers weren't sure that his plan for a counterinsurgency success in about 2005 timeframe in Iraq would work. But he was tenacious in his strategic vision, outlook, maintained good tone, had a team of folks that he could trust and were loyal to him. Right? I wasn't one of them, not that I was disloyal. I just wasn't part of his team at that time. We just hadn't encountered yet. I rolled in on it later on and saw it in action. But he was strategically tenacious, right? So he was unbending in what he thought would work, and it was grounded in both academic and professional rigor. The 2 on the right there, Todd Schroeder and Annette Teresi. We all showed up about the same time in the summer of 2009 in Afghanistan, right? I went out there with General McChrystal. You may recall recent Afghan history. We were losing, right, in a pretty severe way in Afghanistan in the summer of 2009. In fact, the former ISAF, International Security Assistance Force Commander, General McKiernan, was replaced by General McChrystal on rather short notice. So we needed to change the way we were conducting counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan. I hadn't met Todd Schroeder or Annette Teresi before, so I didn't have the relationship, trust, or loyalty yet. But I never met a couple of folks more tenacious in building something out of nothing. We were given an empty gym. We're told where to find the Air Force engineers and construct a new Allied Intelligence Center and create new connectivity norms and establish a network of intelligence professionals through the 4 or 5 different regions of Afghanistan. And they each had unique skill sets. In fact, Todd Schroeder wasn't there right away, and Annette Teresi had to convince me to bring him out. And it was a scene for those of you who follow old cartoons from the Merry Melodies or the Looney Tunes eras, right? There's Foghorn Leghorn, the big old looking, rooster. That was kind of me. And then there's Henry the Chicken Hawk, who's going to, deal with the rooster, And that was Colonel Teresi. And every now and then I'd get the proverbial shaking by the collars. You don't understand. We need Todd Schroeder. We need someone who is tenacious that can get this all done. And back to the reverse mentoring, right? So he became our senior enlisted leader and go-to person. And these are friends for life because when the poo hit the fan, right, for us there to get things done on short notice, while people are shooting at you and you're losing a war, it was pretty important to be both timely and good with what we're doing. And they had the perseverance, right, to understand what the end state would look like, and we kept working our way backwards. Now, we never did, for the record, we never did anything illegal, immoral, or unethical. But we worked hard, and we worked in the gray areas, but we never worked in the red areas when it came to that. I may be mixing my color metaphors, but you get the idea of what I'm talking about there. All right, so those are some quick thoughts on a much longer topic about leadership in general. But what I found were 3 words that help bring a lot of aspects of leadership together. And there are a lot of subsets into each one, right? You pick the adjective or the trait that you think is part of leadership, and I could have expanded the list, only it wouldn't follow my group of 3s, right? People remember things in 3s. We got, earth, wind, fire. On your marks, get set, go. A, B, C. Teamwork, tone, tenacity. You get it. It kind of flows. But how do you make sure people remember what you're talking about? Do you just put up your vision statement, on the wall, and you send out an email once a year for your annual training reminder? No. I'd recommend to any leader here, wherever you go, to come up with your version of what I call the gold standard, right? And I still keep a few copies, right? They're very easy to carry around because they fit, right here in your jacket pocket. So the gold standard, appropriately on what color paper so you don't lose it.
Canary yellow.
Yeah, well, it could be canary yellow. Depends on the stock of paper your wife sends you from, the Kinko's office to your ship or to your desert outpost. But yes, you can see there are some different shades there. We're not uniform. But the aim was to make it gold. You don't lose it with the rest of your white papers around your desk. It's a recognizable phrase, right? The gold standard. And inside, we talked about why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing what we're doing, and what we're doing, okay? And it's portable, right? If you really don't want to read it, you can just fold it in half and use it as a coaster, for your drink. Put it on your nightstand. You put your warm glass of milk right on top of it. It's unclassified, right? For an Intel professional, anything that's produced at the unclassified level is fun. And we're talking about in every one of those. These are different places I've used them over the last 15 years. From Bahrain to Tampa to Afghanistan to Hawaii to the most treacherous place of them all, Washington, D.C. And so when anyone showed up in the command where we worked, right, I was either the director of intelligence or commanding officer, but didn't have to be. Could have done it if I thought of this as a younger person, right? When I was a department head or a mid-level leader as well. If you were part of our team, everyone got a copy of this. And we had a face-to-face sit down in the office. Hi, welcome to fill in the blank. Welcome to NAVCENT N2 Naval Forces Central Command Intel Directorate in Bahrain. Glad you're here. We're a long way from home. Everyone's unaccompanied. How are you doing? No, really, how are you doing, right? You've had to leave your spouse and your children and your dogs and your home, and you're going to be here for a year or two unaccompanied in a high-stress environment. How are you doing? Who was your sponsor? Are you getting enough water? Okay, let's talk about the work we do. You'll have an individual portfolio that you're going to be the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps military analyst. Okay, I have no unique advice. You have 2 or 3 layers in the chain of command between me and you. They're going to help you on what you do there. But I do want to talk to you about why the Naval Forces Central Command mission is important in relation to the Central Command's mission. I want to tell you why what you're doing on the IRGC military is important to our comprehensive understanding of Iran and the region. And I want to emphasize to you, right, the basic principles of how we'll comport ourselves here. Right? It's the sheet of music that we all sing by. It's teamwork, tone, and tenacity. And here's some thoughts on every one of them. So it shouldn't come as a shock to anyone in the command, right? If they're not doing well, they'd get feedback that, that's not the teamwork we're looking for, okay? I'm hearing from the N3 and the ops department that you're unwilling, or didn't show up at the operational planning team meeting. That's embarrassing to you, it's embarrassing to us. More importantly, we're not aiding the teams moving forward on this issue. Oh, someone forwarded me this email that you sent to them, which is really smarky. That's a combination between smarmy and snarky, right? That's not how we want to represent ourselves in writing. That's not good tone. And where are you on this project? It was due last night. I came in this morning, I got nothing. Oh, okay, you're sick, you're busy. No, you work it backwards, right? These are small tactical anecdotal examples, but you get an idea. And if you have a reference point, that's great. And then you know how the military, they love those challenge coins. I don't carry them around anymore because, I'm finally Mr. Becker again after, all those years in uniform. But if someone really is an exemplar of the things that you talk about are important, find a way to reward them. And there are a lot of different ways to reward folks, right? In the military, we love giving out medals and ribbons. Typically, you don't give those out every day, though. We can't give out cash awards, at least to those in uniform. Attaboys are great, and I recommend them, right? Public praising on emails or in assemblies. But a little something, whatever it may be, whatever your version of a feel-good recognition prize for someone's behavior that'll incentivize them, right, to do that kind of thing. That one happened to be my Joint Staff J2 coin. And that's a Pentagon, so you can tell where I work. So I'm reconsidering whether I should carry a coin as Mr. Becker, right, the T3 group guy. But I think it'll be the triangle, right, and teamwork, tone, and tenacity, because my Pentagon days are done. I don't want people to confuse me really with, being the old military guy. All right. Hey, this is the closing slide. So I mentioned you can check out my website. I talk about these issues to both corporate folks and the healthcare industry quite a bit. Surprisingly more healthcare than corporate. I have a unique story to tell. I'll just, in summary, not to tease you too much, right? On December 23rd, 2014, not too many hours before Christmas Eve, I was diagnosed with stage 4 bone marrow cancer at Walter Reed Hospital, aka Bethesda Naval Hospital. I had just run the Honolulu Marathon. I thought I was otherwise healthy. Probably the most medicine I had taken in my adult life was Motrin and Tylenol. There the 3 T's met the 3 U's, right? The unwanted, the unexpected, and the uncertain. There the poo hit the fan, all right? What do you do in a situation like this? Well, I fell back on teamwork, tone, tenacity as a way to guide my family behavior, as a way to guide my behavior with the healthcare professionals that I became associated with. It's a good thing I didn't know that there was no stage 5, on stages of cancer. When they said you have stage 4, I thought, it's like 6 stages from stage 10. I'm probably nowhere near the end, right? No. The outcome was in doubt. And I spent most of 2015 in the hospital, and I went through high-dose chemotherapy and several surgeries and something really sporty called a stem cell transplant, right? And faith, family, fitness, they all helped pull me through. And this is why I have a passionate about sharing this story. And that's why I believe, just like that big piece of chocolate says, that life is good. For the record, I did not eat that chocolate. I didn't even open it because it would have been too much for even me, to down at the time. So that's a picture maybe about 12 years ago in Kuwait. And I was probably 12 years and 15 pounds ago, I think. That seems about right, from where I am. All right, those are my closing comments on teamwork, tone, tenacity, right? They work anywhere. I learned about them in the military from some of the greatest military leaders of this generation, maybe of all time. But they're not just military lessons, right? They apply to the corporate world, they apply to the real world, they apply to personal crises as well. And I just urge you to consider them as a framework to use whenever you need them. So, yes sir, the first question there, and we could talk about teamwork, tone, tenacity, or sports, politics, media, entertainment, whatever's on your mind, because we have about 10 minutes or so.
How would you handle if someone on your team was a Machiavellian individual who was using his talents for his own benefit, to ascend the dominance hierarchy?
Yeah.
How would you handle that person?
Yeah, it's an important point, right? And the best thing to do is direct contact as quick as possible, right? I worked for a boss once who said, you should never walk by a mistake, right? Even if you're just walking in the corridors, the passageways as we call them on a ship, right? And there's a piece of trash on the floor. So what that you don't work there, it's not your space. Pick it up, right? Just pick it up and clean it up. So even more important, if you're responsible, for the morale, welfare, performance of a team, and there's a Machiavellian, personality within it, who maybe at best you could say they're a vicious complier, but at worst they're just a vicious non-complier, right? Sit that person down, say, here's my perception of where we are, right? Don't let it last a minute more than it has to, right? There's ways to do it professionally. There may be HR guidelines in your organization. Make sure you follow them, right? Have a third person, in there if that's the case, right? It's not a conspiracy, it's just an extra set of eyes. Hey, here's what we're trying to do as a team. Here's my perception of how you are not helping us, okay? As long as I'm accountable and responsible and part of, I don't know, you use the phrase chain of command in civilian corporation, but part of your hierarchy, right, part of the office hierarchy, I want to let you know, consider this verbal instruction that you're out of compliance with where we're going. Here's what, it's not just pointing out the problem. Here's what we recommend, here's what I recommend, here's what we recommend if you have an HR partner there, here's what recommend you do about it. And let's give that a try. And one end of the spectrum, the person will say, wow, I had no idea I was, that type of idiot. Chances are they did, right? And the other aspect will probably be closer to this. I don't know what you're talking about, and I am the model employee and all that stuff. Well, okay, so now let's suppose you're stuck with them. policymakers and political leaders of the future. It's tough to fire some GSs, for example, within the government system. Well, you can minimize their role. You may not be able to fire them as a true private employee, but I've had this. I've had this in a lot of levels. Okay, we can't dock your pay. We're going to continue to give you counseling that you're not the ideal team player and you're not supporting our goals, but we're not going to have you in charge of other people. I'm going to put you in charge of working by yourself on individual projects where you report directly to me. Right? And it's not to put the screws to them. It's just we're minimizing their malign influence on others. And in some cases, that changed people's tune, and they got back on board because they missed the interaction after all was said and done about being part of something bigger than themselves. But others just got the message and eventually quit because they didn't like being marginalized. So I use the tools like that. Right now, I only have one other employee in the Becker T3 group. It's my wife. There's zero chance I would fire her, but there's zero chance she would have any malign influence on me as well. But we're on the verge of hiring, someone because things are just fine now, right? But suppose I have 20, 30 folks down the road, and how do I know about this? Did I learn any of that from the heroes whose picture I showed you before? Nope. It's more than a lifetime's worth of experience. It's a lot about reading. I have the Becker Teamwork Tone Tenacity reading list. It's 9 books. One of them is the story of Shackleton's expedition to the Antarctic. Right? You may know his ship Endurance became icebound. He led every single member of his team to safety in a real harrowing tale of daring do. But he realized he had some Machiavellian complainers, right, in his icebound Antarctic camp. And he kept them in his tent and away from the others, right? So, they didn't spread their ill will, and that's an important sense of leadership as well. Great point. Thank you for bringing it up. What else would you like to talk about? Yes, sir, and then...
Sir, a lot of our commissioning sources and stuff teach a lot about leadership to the young junior officers and stuff. And it's usually examples of good leadership. But then when you're out there, you find yourself in a position where you're gaining lots of experience of what not to do from a not so good leader. And I learned later on that someone finally said, well, it's your responsibility to make them better, reverse mentor them. What are the techniques for that? And that doesn't always go over real well.
You're right.
When they find out they're being reverse mentored.
Another great point. I always tried to lighten the load of my leaders who were bad leaders. That means there was less that they could screw up, right? Or less that they could, spoil by their brand of leadership. So it's an awkward conversation for a junior to tell any senior, hey, you're really missing the point. We get it down here, but you don't get it up there. That's an awkward conversation to have, right? Kids, I tried that once with my dad, right? It didn't work out too well, right? I never tried that with, a very senior officer. But there are subtle ways. This is, listen, leadership is not it's not a title, right? It's an accumulation of behaviors and activities, right? That's what leadership is. So leadership is just as much about influence, right? And it doesn't have to be, John Wayne in the Sands of Iwo Jima, in the upper right. That's one type of leadership, right? Follow me, grunts. Okay, we're going to take this beachhead and hill. There could be influence, not malign influence, but positive influence. Okay, this person is an idiot. That's probably a strong word, but okay, they're not as helpful as we wish. How can we come up with a plan to subdivide his tasks, her tasks, so we each get a piece of it and maybe come up with a solution? So it's a bit of innovative thinking. Try to lighten the load of someone who may not be overburdened. you know, it's not that they have too much in their backpack, it's just they're doing it wrong to what you think. So offer some alternative solutions, right?
And to piggyback off that,
Okay.
show, not tell. Don't tell them they're doing it wrong, show a better solution.
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, well said. You could give the lecture. You know.
Nothing.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks for your presentation. I think this T3 concept is very good, but in a real situation, whether in private sector or public sector, that we saw growers, they are always isolated. It's very hard to have a T3 practice. So is there any better way to add as maybe the DOJ or personnel office to really impose a prosecution about employer who practice unlawfully? But this also hurt the health of the people and their family.
Well, you know, thank you. You're right. For big organizations like DOJ or DOD, you know, I don't have a good answer for you. You don't get a better leader who embodies the attributes of teamwork, tone, tenacity than someone like General Mattis. Okay? He's all those things and then some. So he's at the pinnacle of the DOD, pretty big organization. But can we assure that in a big bureaucracy that every key department and service will follow his lead on these principles? No. So I don't have a good answer for you, so I would just say for anyone that you're associated with, just try and come up with a grassroots solution at your level, and hopefully like a good idea or a drop of water in a pond, the ripple will spread. Back to my point of, I wasn't always in the best teams, right? As much as I thought I had a handle on how organizational behavior should occur, there was someone at the base that did it better. What was their special sauce? What did they have that we don't have? Let me try and emulate that over here. And sometimes it didn't take. And I left that job back to the point of, oh, I learned lessons from the great leaders. I didn't point out all the terrible leaders I have all the way. That's dirty pool if I put up pictures of, you know, all the people that I thought were morons, you know, that I worked for over the years, and there were plenty. And you probably have your share too, right? You know, I'm 56. You don't have to be 56-year-old to have had, you know, your share of working for morons along the way. But not good tone, right, to call them out by name or photo. But I'd share with you that is a citation from a famous dead admiral named Hyman Rickover. He was the father of the nuclear navy. So Rickover was keen on pointing out that success teaches nothing, only failure teaches. So it's okay if you have a bad boss, not in general, but if you're taking away what not to do, you know, when you have the chance to apply it elsewhere. So I don't mean to be too much of a Pollyanna about this, but if there's a bad boss, a bad leadership situation, you may be trapped there for a while. There's no fancier way to say it. And you're unable to affect change, even by influence from the middle or the lower levels. But when you get the chance, when you move along somewhere else, take good notes. Apply them and just try and improve the situation elsewhere. So I'm mindful of your time. It's 5 o'clock. I'll stay as long as you'd like. But otherwise, I just thank you for listening to a little bit about teamwork, tone, tenacity. I hope they'll aid you in your professional endeavors, and hope to see you again. Thank you all.
Thank you.